I am Elaine Stabler, magazine editor at Alliance Magazine, the only philanthropy publication with a truly global focus. And this is a very special one-off podcast episode hosted in collaboration with IG Advisors. Before I introduce my two guests, listeners, I want to pose a question to you. I'm going to assume you're here today because you work in philanthropy or a related field. Maybe you're on your commute or taking a quick breather between meetings. If I could sneak a glance at your phone, I'd probably find a flood of Slack messages, a few pings from LinkedIn, and an inbox full of updates on new reports, proposals, grant cycles. Maybe there's even a cheeky newsletter from Alliance Magazine. So here's the question, and one I think I already know the answer to. Have you ever been in a room, tried to explain what you do, and been met with that blank, blinking expression? Philanthropy as a field is still relatively unknown. It has very few pop culture references or mainstream touchpoints. In fact, a recent UK-based study by NFP Intelligence looked at public attitudes towards trusts, foundations, and donor-advised funds. Out of 1,019 respondents, 25% said they'd never heard of charitable trusts and foundations, and a whopping 45% said, yes, but I'm not sure what they are. It just goes to show there's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to the public's understanding of philanthropy. But there's some good news. The next time you find yourself in that room faced with puzzled looks, you'll have a new recommendation to fuel their understanding. The debut novel, Someone's Gotta Give, by author Alisha Fernandez Miranda, a work of fiction where philanthropy isn't just a motif or a metaphor, it's one of the central themes. And I feel super lucky today because joining me in the studio is Alisha herself and Josiane Smith. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I cannot wait to have this conversation.
Me too.
Well, Alisha, you are an award-winning Cuban-American author. Someone's Gotta Give is your debut novel. Your first book, the memoir My What If Year, featured on Good Morning America and was Best New Book in People's Magazine and the Boston Globe. Your writing has also been published in Vogue, Marie Claire, Shondaland, and numerous other publications. And Alisha is also the current chair at IG Advisors, a leading social impact agency that consults the world's biggest nonprofits, including the Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, and UN Women. I have one very important question for you, Alisha. How excited are you to be talking about your debut novel today?
I literally could not be more excited to be in the studio with you. I have the book coming out very shortly, and so this is actually one of the first discussions I'm having about it. And talking about this book with people in the sector is basically why I wrote it, so I could have these conversations. So I am super, super excited.
Great. Alisha is going to read a short excerpt from Someone's Gotta Give in just a moment, but before we get to that, I'd like to properly introduce our other guest today, Josiane. Josiane Smith, you are a philanthropy advisor and learning designer who focuses on racial and economic justice, social innovation, and regeneration. You support leading social work organizations and philanthropic initiatives globally, including Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, the Roma Foundation for Europe, the Lloyds Bank Foundation, Choreo, and 10 Years' Time. Josiane is also a published poet, featuring internationally in the On Being Studios special anthology on mindful poetry moments, the Minds Shine Bright anthology entitled Confidence, and co-edited International Poetry Press Magma 89. Great publication, by the way. A facilitator systems thinker and Quaker, Josiane is committed to creating change from the inside out. And my question for you, on a scale of 1 to 10, Josiane, how weird is it to be sat here talking about a work of fiction where philanthropy is one of the main themes? It must feel like worlds colliding.
I think the world that we work in is hilariously fictionist anyway. So not that weird, but cathartic 10, probably. I think we're going to have a good conversation today.
Okay, well, I am looking forward to getting into that. Alisha, would you like to give us a little taste of Someone's Gotta Give?
More than anything, I would. I brought a little section to read, which comes pretty early in the book. It features Lucia, who is the protagonist of the book. And Lucia is a sort of lifelong, purpose-driven person. She has been a fundraiser. At the very beginning of the novel, she finds herself newly married to a British man and kind of living this life in London that was not what she had expected. She has a young daughter. She's not working, and she's trying to find her place in this world that she doesn't quite understand or fit in. And she gets a job working for a private bank, a very posh private bank in the city, as a philanthropy advisor to the rich and powerful. So in this scene that I'm going to read you, Lucia is attending the bank's philanthropy day. She is in Buckingham Palace. She is mingling with celebrities and high-profile folks and lots of the bank's client and prospects. And she's just started this job, and so everything is kind of hitting her in these waves of awe. And so that's the little bit I'm going to read for you. Introductions were quickly made, although Lucia already knew Brody Cutler by reputation. He was the definition of a tech wonderkind, enrolling at Stanford at 15, only to drop out 2 years later and sell his music pirating app for a large fortune. He was dressed like he was trying to cosplay an elder statesman. Tweed coat with leather elbow patches, Steve Jobsian black turtleneck, and a wisp of an oiled-up goatee that looked like it had taken significant effort to grow. "I've never done philanthropy per se," he said, raising his fingers into air quotes, "but I'm very into social and environmental justice and all their related causes and forms." "That's excellent," Lucia said, sipping her water while she considered how else to respond. She thought back to an interview with him she had read in Forbes, a notorious one where he went on and on about the need to reduce carbon emissions given aboard his private jet. The small one, not the big one. "Congratulations, by the way," she said. "I hear you're getting married." "Yes, indeed, thank you. I'm not a fan of the institution per se, but it's important to my fiancé's family, so down the aisle we'll walk. I've just come from my bachelor party last week in Turks and Caicos." "I bet that was wild," Lucia said. "Actually, no," Brody deadpanned. "I'm passionately committed to ending the exploitation of women. So instead of the traditional entertainment, I hosted a panel discussion with exotic dancers discussing their career paths. It was highly disruptive." Lucia, who had trained herself to paste a placid smile on her face when she heard her donors at Arte Austin spout all sorts of nonsense, nearly spit out her water. "That does sound disruptive," she said, taking another sip to stifle her laughter. "So what brings you to Philanthropy Day, since you're not into philanthropy?" She mirrored his air quotes back at him. "I'm here to find ideas, disruptive ones. That's what the world needs." He went on without really making eye contact with her. "More tech people solving these problems." Personally, Lucia believed that was probably the last thing the world needed, but nothing more than a mutter of assent seemed to be required. "Most nonprofits are bloated and wasteful," he went on. "Their CEOs get paid huge salaries, and they use all their donations to pad their fat wallets." Lucia pinched the inside of her wrist. She had heard this baseless misconception more than once in her career, and it always drove her batty. Brody's base salary for a day would have been enough to keep an organization like Arte Austin afloat for a month. Who did they think was going to run the programs if no one got paid? "I want to fund something that has never been done before and is going to fix everything." Wow, that would be... Before she could say more, they were interrupted by the entrance of a tuxedo-clad man. "Ladies and gentlemen, the princess will be arriving shortly. Please make your way to your designated tables for the greeting." Disruptive, Lucia finished.
Okay, so you gave us a little overview of where Lucia is at in the story, and everything comes from her perspective as the protagonist. And like you said, she's a Venezuelan American arts fundraiser. She's living in Austin, Texas at the beginning, but then she relocates to London after she marries her fiancé, Ollie. And she's restless, she's craving more. She joins this global bank's philanthropy unit and steps into this surreal world of wealth and privilege. And she's serving high net worth clients, like we just heard, and catering somewhat incredulously to their whims. Part of that overview is actually lifted from Josiane's review of the book, which is going to be published in the September issue of Alliance magazine. And now I want to get into it and ask you a few questions. So, Someone's Got to Give is a work of fiction, but are there any aspects of the story based on your own experience?
No, that would just be indelicate of me to say too much. I mean, look, the best fiction comes, I think, from it's not even true experiences, but true feelings. So it would be an absolute lie to say that after almost 20 years of working in philanthropy, there aren't plenty of things in this book that have been inspired by my own experiences. But I think what I really tried to capture was so much of what I feel about philanthropy. So many of Lucia's feelings are my feelings that I have had. there was so much in there in those early drafts that was just like thinly veiled experiences from my own life. And I think that as the story and the characters began to take on a life of their own, it really morphed into something entirely new. But, absolutely, I think the initial sort of feedback I've gotten from some folks who have read the book early, who work in the sector, has been that it feels very relatable. And I think that is intentional because certainly it is a relation of what my experience has been like in many ways as a Latin American living in London, as someone working in philanthropy, as someone who was a new mom and trying to find her place. All of those emotions that Lucia feels are very true to me.
Great. Well, I appreciate your honesty as well. Okay, I have one more question for you, and then I think we'll move over to Josiane. But the biggest question is, why did you decide to write this book?
I had a friend who is a novelist say to me once that everybody's first novel is about their big thing, whatever the big thing in their life is they're trying to process. And so I guess my big thing is philanthropy and also being a mother. I mean, for sure, being a working mom with ambition and trying to achieve a purpose that I felt like was really important to me and that sometimes felt out of my reach and like maybe I was compromising too much to get to. I really wanted to explore this space and this world, and doing it from a fictional perspective was so freeing in a way. I was not bound by what I normally have to be bound by, which is, my approach to philanthropy advising, and I'd be interested to hear from you, Josiane, how this aligns with yours or not, is very much about creating a big tent. I think I have a very inclusive approach. It's about bringing people on the journey. I recognize that, we are not going to get there by ourselves, and that oftentimes people are going to come along that don't have the same point of view. And so creating a welcoming, inclusive environment for people where they start to see for themselves how amazing it can be when you engage in philanthropy is very much my professional MO. But being able to tell this story as fiction in philanthropy meant that I wasn't bound by any of that when I was writing the situations Lucia was in, how she would react, how she would respond, how she would behave. I was just able to imagine, what would I do if my entire goal here is to create narrative tension or make this really uncomfortable for her or give everybody a happy ending? And that was really fun. It was really freeing. It felt extremely cathartic. I love that you use that word because that's 100% how I felt writing it. It felt really good to write it as fiction.
Amazing. Yeah, in answer to your kind of question about philanthropy advisory work and building that big tent, which I think is a great metaphor, there's something about the tension between kind of creating enabling environments, which is language that we might all use, but not being enablers. So there was this language that we'd use in the sector around kind of not being philanthropy support, but being philanthropy challenge, being able to challenge the paradigms that philanthropy operates in, and but also, so kind of in a way speaking truth to power, but also creating an enabling environment for whatever the decisions are to take place. And I think your book really navigates those tensions quite well. There's definitely decisions that Lucia maybe wouldn't have chosen herself, and she has to wrestle with that, which I think is great. You talked kind of about the morphing of your perceptions of the philanthropic world through writing the book based on your own experiences, but then kind of leaning more into the fictionist characters. So I guess I'm curious about, how did your perceptions and maybe even assumptions of philanthropy changed as you went more into this fictional world?
I got into philanthropy in 2005, and it was a very different world then. I was 26 years old advising companies on strategic philanthropy. I didn't know anything about what I was doing, but I knew more than they did. They knew even less than me. And I had this real luxury of getting to grow up in my own career as philanthropy was growing up too. So it was a lot of learning, but like this idea, you couldn't do a philanthropy master's when I was starting out. There were not so many people that were active in this as the sophisticated profession that it is now. And that has really grown so much. And so one thing that really shifted for me, I think that because I had to go back into the person that I was when I was first moving to London, when I was first starting out in this world, when philanthropy advisory was new to me, when I was overwhelmed with the power that you could hold as an advisor in helping to move assets and wealth. There was also a naivete involved in that, but it was very joyful. And 20 years doing the same of anything is going to make you feel a little bit jaded about it. So I would say that one thing that really changed for me was revisiting those early days and that joy that I had in philanthropy in those early days. I think that certainly, I would say since at least 2016 and maybe before, I've had a lot of questions about what is the purpose of what we're doing here? Are we really making the impact that we think we should be? Really soul-searching questions about my own role in this world, in this field. And that can sometimes make you feel like, is it all even worth it? And I think that having so much fun with these characters, remembering that joy, that pleasure, that feeling, just feeling really good when you do something really good for other people was really nice to reconnect to. I kind of think I needed that. And I think that experiencing it through fiction helped me find that again.
We've established that philanthropy is a central theme to the book. But in your opinion, and I know that Josiane has opinions about this as well, but what are some of the other main themes?
So this book was for a very long time titled Unrestricted Giving. My publisher said that was too wonky, it was going to be, people would think it was like a nonfiction book about giving, which is sad because I love the title, Someone's Gotta Give, but Unrestricted Giving held a lot of meaning for me because it had that double meaning. It is, I think, a fantastic way to give your money if you are giving it, to give unrestricted. But it also really spoke to this idea, I think, of being a woman in the world as a mother working in this sector, in particularly, not exclusively, but in particularly being a wife, having all of these obligations to people and constantly being asked to give these pieces of yourself all the time. And that being an expectation of what it is you do and who you are. And I found motherhood and this switch for me from being a person who was responsible for myself to then being a person who had not just one, but two babies at one time that I was then responsible for. And what was required of me to give of myself in that role, really overwhelming at the beginning. Early motherhood was a challenging time for me, for sure. And now my twins are 13 and, living their own lives. But I can still remember what that feels like. And so that idea of what we give of ourselves as mothers, as partners, was so core to the writing of this. I think as important to me as exploring the tensions in the philanthropy world, this tension between meaning well and doing good, which comes up again and again and is something that I feel really strongly in my own professional life. Definitely this idea of how much of ourselves are we willing to give for the people that we love, for the things we want to achieve, is a major theme of the book for me.
It comes halfway through the book, and I think Lucia is asked this question by a colleague of hers. And I think the question is, at what cost? What cost are you willing to do this? And I think that's one of the central questions of the book for sure, is at what cost? So I was curious for you how you think that question is relevant to philanthropy today or people who work in the philanthropy field.
It is such a challenging question. And I think that anybody who's really thinking about the work we do in philanthropy is thinking about that question. There is so much that we do in the name of greater good, and it does not always pay off. And I felt that very keenly. I think, when you were talking about how things have developed and how the sector has changed and shifted, and a lot of Lucia's experience for me, especially working in a corporate environment, was coming up at a time where we were just expected to say yes to everything. I like to hope and think that young women who are professionals joining the workforce now do not feel that same compulsion. They probably do to some extent, but there was no paradigm of pushing back or saying no or being like, oh, well, this is going to be too far, or I don't think this is worth it for what we're trying to achieve. And that was I think it's changed. I think it still has more to go in terms of changing, but it was very much a feature of my own early career. And so I do think that there is a cost, having done this now for almost 2 decades, not everything that I thought was worth the time and investment, even if it was with a client trying to get them to a certain point with their giving, it's not all paid off. And it hasn't all been worth it. And I think that's a really important reflective question. I think there are lines. I think it's becoming increasingly important for better or for worse in this polarizing environment for people to decide where their own red lines are, to decide when they need to say no and when they need to push back. And that didn't feel very accessible to me early in my career, but it feels more accessible to me now, and I hope it does to others. And so I think that question is relevant to everybody, and to really reflect on whether the long game is what you're playing? Or are you just going along with it because you don't want to cause any trouble?
Right. And there's another cost as well, which is the kind of cost of unchecked wealth accumulation and preservation as well. And the book kind of navigates those tensions too, where Lucy is looking at the money that's moving. She's wondering, what will this cost ordinary people? What has this cost ordinary people? Or what will this cost ecosystems for a particular project that's just been opened up for various reasons? So something about that, the kind of navigation of the cost to self, which you've spoken about so eloquently, and which I think is really relevant, but also then thinking about what is the cost to our world while we're running out of time in the context of a climate emergency. So this question of cost is so beautifully handled in the book, and also non-judgmental, which I thought was really skillful as well. There's not a sense, Lucy is analyzing it, but at the same time, there's not this sense of where there is a right and where there is a wrong. And I think you're cool to people to decide what they're willing to pay for the work that they do personally and professionally, to assess what the cost is, and then to decide what they're willing to pay, I think is a really good piece of advice, actually.
I think that one of the interesting conversations that's come up with my philanthropy hat on in the past year is this idea of ethical fundraising policies, ethical donation policies, and thinking about whether it matters more where money is going to or where it's coming from. We ran an event at the Edinburgh International Book Festival last year alongside the book festival with IG to talk about this, because as readers of Alliance will certainly know, this has been a question in the arts sector, and certainly where I'm based now in Edinburgh in the festival and arts sector, it's been a huge question. And I think that this event that we ran was about exploring the gray and trying to see things from different angles. And I feel, and I maybe sound so old when I say this, but I feel like there's so much less space for nuance and gray.
Right.
That's not what people want. They want a quick decision. They want to take a side. And as much as I do think it's important to decide where your red lines are, understanding that there is also this world of gray that exists around you is really important to being able to do this job well and thoughtfully, because it's not just a matter of yes or no most of the time. There are questions, and Lucia grapples with those questions. And that was really fun because there were no real world consequences of her grappling with those questions. I could just write them, and I could write whatever I wanted and then be done with it.
It's the combination of the cost and time, though. I'm just going back to a comment you made earlier about playing the long game. It's how much is it costing you over what period of time? How long can you keep this up before the cost to your perhaps morals is too high?
Without spoiling a lot, Lucia really gets there. And those crucial decision points for her in the book that come towards the end were rewritten again and again. What you're going to read wasn't always the version. There were many, many versions of how she navigated that decision, what she decided to do, who was involved, when she decided the cost was too much, because it's not such an easy question, right? And I think that there are lots of permutations of what it could be. So what you're going to read is one version of that, but there could have been many others in other parallel universes where I was writing lots of different versions of this book.
I think this is a really good jumping off point for a question around the risks and trade-offs that are present in Someone's Gotta Give. I'm always curious when I speak to writers about what surprised them through the writing process. So we've mentioned some of the risks and trade-offs that might be present in our work and personally and professionally, but also what others emerged for Lucia in the book, and did any surprise you?
In the many versions of this book, or the many drafts that I went through, writing the story that I thought I wanted to tell and the story that I ended up telling for the reader, there was a big path in between that. I think I had all of these ideas in my head about what I wanted to say about philanthropy with a capital P, what I wanted to say about motherhood, what I wanted people to walk away with. There was an entire chapter of this book at one point all about how private banks incentivize philanthropy advisors. And my editor was like, nobody wants to read this. I was like, but I really want to write it. I think it's important that people know what their private banker is, how they're being incentivized. She was like, no, you got to cut it out. And I was glad I had an editor with such a good eye for that, because it's not a world that people know very much about. And so there was so much that had to change in order to make this a story that people would want to continue reading, that people were going to want to turn the pages, to make Lucia a character that readers would fall in love with and root for, even when she's making terrible decisions for herself. And that really surprised me. It surprised me how fiction has to take on a life of its own, and how it's not like writing a nonfiction book where you have your point of view and you're proving it throughout. You have to let the story unfold. And it really took me a while to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But once I did, I was like, oh, I get it now. This is great.
Very good. Very interesting.
I didn't know what to expect when I started the book, but I ended up finishing it in like 2 days.
Oh my God, what a high compliment.
Yeah.
It was, I wouldn't say personally it's the type of book that I might gravitate towards. But once I started, I mean, it really helped that there is like a quote from a Taylor Swift song in like the epigraph. I was like, okay, I'm in.
I want to know how many epigraphs pair Carnegie and Taylor Swift in their quote. Like, are there others?
Whoever's done it are your people. Is that?
Absolutely. I mean, it helped. I was like, okay, we're in. Let's do it. I just couldn't put it down because like the questions that Lucia was wrestling with, I wrestled with.
It was absorbing, but annoyingly so, because I was really kind of wondering, what is this book giving me? I mean, it's well written, it's complex and it's nuanced, but why was I so, it was almost like addicted to it. It was precarious, the kind of situations I was reading this book in, like train platforms, like not looking at the time the train was coming.
That's very dangerous.
Bags and just like scrolling through the proof, but it was cathartic. It was almost like being able to respect the independent journey of a colleague almost, and recognize that they've navigated very complex things, and to feel some sense of respect for the journey.
Yeah, but it's also, why do people read books generally? It's to seek out truth, it's to find empathy, it's to feel seen in a way. And this is one of the only books that I've read that speaks directly to the sector that we work in. I guess the question that I'm trying to ask you, and one which I might, if I was in the room with your editor, maybe I would say, I think it is important that we look at these scenes that you wanted to cut because you made it accessible, which was such a challenge. I'm not sure how you did it and in such a way that was so compelling, but did you consciously write this book to make it accessible for a general audience, people who don't work in our sector?
I think that was always the hope, that I would be able to write something that would have mass appeal, obviously. But it's very funny because I think that it was almost... So I agree with you. I don't think there's a lot of good pop culture out there about philanthropy at all. Although increasingly I'm obsessed with the Gilded Age, which I'm like almost embarrassed to say on this podcast. But the way that the Gilded Age approaches the pay for play of philanthropy in the late 1800s, which is not so different from now, I highly recommend for all of your listeners. But a lot of people, if I was explaining the book, they'd be like, oh, like Loot, which was the Maya Rudolph show on Apple TV. And when I watched Loot, I was like, whoever wrote the show has obviously never worked in philanthropy because it's nothing like this. And so I think that while I knew it needed to be accessible, but I think that some of that understanding and accessibility came through many different versions, and people like my editor who don't live in the sector being like, I don't understand this, or this is too much, or, oh, this is fascinating, I've never thought of this before, and getting that feedback in real time from outside the sector. But also, this has been my world for the last 20 years. So if I'm talking about writing a novel and I want a character to have true emotions, she's doing that on a backdrop that feels very true to me. So the challenge for me was almost, how do I describe this world that I have existed and moved around in for so long in a way that people will understand, but in being true to the character and true to the decisions I thought she would make. I think a lot of that just kind of came through. So I hope that people who sit outside the sector have a deeper understanding. I do feel like philanthropy has a much greater impact on the everyday person's life than they ever care to think about. And if one outcome of this book is that people who have never engaged with this field at all start to think a little bit more about it, or think like, it's interesting that in the US you get a tax incentive for giving, and you get to decide what you want to do with that money if you have a big foundation, not your democratically elected officials. Wouldn't that be a nice bonus if people started to think about those things? But I do think it's relevant to everybody, whether they realize it or not. And so I hope that people can see that as they read through.
One thing we haven't talked about yet is that you are Cuban American. and you are writing a character who is living in London. And unfortunately for you, the two people that you are talking to today are both native Londoners.
Fortunately for me, I would say.
I wanted to ask you, what was your experience of trying to write this culture, as an observer, as a visitor to this strange land? How did you find writing that?
So I grew up on these depictions of British culture by British writers. And that is really, when I moved to the UK, that is naively what I thought it was going to be like. I was going to have I was going to dress like the Spice Girls. My love life was going to be like Notting Hill. My work life was going to be like Bridget Jones's Diary. Like this was what it was going to be. I blame Richard Curtis for so much of what has unfolded since then. And I have found that my experience as an American in London has been really, completely formative. Like I've spent the majority of my adult life here now. I became a citizen in the UK in 2014. My children have only ever lived in the UK. And so I occupy this really weird position where this is my home. And I think the next year or two, I will have lived in London longer than I've lived anywhere else, including Miami, where I really feel like my home is and where I grew up. And yet I am so other every time I am here. I am not, anytime I open my mouth, the assumption is that I am not from here. Culturally, I'm very American. And even when I started writing with both my What If Year and Someone's Gotta Give, I wrote these books with American spelling. Like even though in my professional life I write in British spelling, my creative writing is all in American spelling because this is like my most American voice. So London and Brits were going to have to be character, as you described it when we were offline in this book, because that experience for me has been fun and funny. It's been scary. It's been isolating. It's been welcoming. It's been all of the things. And so in the same way that I needed to go back to the part of my life where I was early in my career, where I was finding all of that, where I was early in my motherhood journey, to get into Lucia's head, I also had to go back into what those early days were like of when I first moved here and everything was new and exciting and confusing and people never just said what they meant. Like they just said things and then somebody else would be like, oh no, that meant they hated it. And I was like, wait, what? And that's real. It's real for me. And so I hope that a British audience reads this and sees that I love living here and I love my life here and I love being in the UK. And also I find it hilarious as an American, so many of the elements of the culture here that still baffle me after almost 20 years.
I mean, it was definitely entertaining. I think both of us, when we read the book, were picking up on these sort of stereotypes and cliches.
Caricatures almost.
Yes,
at times,
in some places.
Extended versions and faces of British culture. But I think that's the asset of the book, actually, is the way that you are an observer to life, you're an observer to an industry, an observer to a culture as well, and that allows us to reflect on our culture as well and our work in a way. So I think it's the asset of the book, but it was definitely, as you said, it was an entertaining part of the book. It was another character, British life.
Take it as a love letter. Mm. But I think that if you think about depictions in British popular culture of Americans,
yep.
It's kind of, a lot of it does. And part of it is this genre, right? Like this is fun and funny. Obviously, things need to be heightened for humor and excitement. A lot of the audience of this book will be American. But I hope that it is still loving and respectful because I really do feel very much at home in the UK. And I think this will be my home for the foreseeable future. And I really have been so grateful for the opportunity to be part of this city and this country, but also to experience it as an outsider and be able to note on and comment on things that you might not notice or see if you grew up here and spent every day. As I'm sure you both would. If you moved to Miami, you'd be like, what is happening here?
Absolutely, fair enough. That's true. Or we'd notice the thing, we'd pick up on the things that maybe resonate with what we have, the caricatures we know of American life and culture, and we wouldn't necessarily pick up on the nuances or the instances where there's different ways to play out, like different types of meals. I think at one point there's a meal of quail and partridge, which is hilarious, but also, a very proper meal for some people. And if I had something similar in Miami for American culture, I think I'd remember that and I'd make that noteworthy as well. So yeah,
I have definitely been served both quail and partridge.
And did you catch the shot?
Formal dinners? Thank God. Well, I have had, but I didn't break a tooth.
Right.
Thank goodness.
So that's good. Great.
I didn't break
Very
a tooth,
lucky.
but I have had to have that same awakening moment of why is there a bullet in the meat that someone has given me at the table, and what's wrong with the chicken? It's a much more normal size for eating. So
amazing. Okay, I have one last big question for you, and without giving away any spoilers, Someone's Gotta Give has a happy ending. Is that too much of a fiction for real people working in the philanthropy sector?
Oh, it's a total fictional ending. It's my dream ending. But I am a happy ending person. Like I wrote a book that I wanted to read. I really enjoy a juicy, compelling piece of women's fiction. I like a book that's going to help me escape. I love a book that makes me laugh. I like a little bit of a love story. So, I don't know that I could write a book that I didn't want to read. Maybe I'm not that skilled just yet with my craft. Maybe I'll get there eventually. So it was a no-brainer to me that this book was going to have a happy ending. And I would say that the very last scene, the last chapter and the epilogue were almost the first things that I wrote, and that didn't change from the very beginning. So a lot of other things changed, but I knew how I wanted this book to end. But yeah, I mean, maybe that's the most fictional part of this, that she gets the ending that she gets. I hope this is teasing it for your listeners, so they're going to want to go out and read it. In real life, that would not probably ever happen. Although I think I make a pretty good justification for how it could happen. But she needed that resolution. Unfortunately, I don't think most of us get that in our day-to-day jobs, where we get that really happy moment where we think, oh, yeah, it was all worth it for this one thing. But I don't read books that have sad endings. I mostly read books with happy endings. So I needed to give that to Lucia. I loved her too much to not give her a nice ending. And it was a little bit of wish fulfillment, I think, to be able to do that.
I guess just to comment that what feels like the happiest part of the happy ending is that Lucia is confident in her choices. That is what makes the happy ending, actually, rather than the actual events and how they play out. I think it's the way that she takes ownership back of her life and her choices. And that is the happy ending. And I'm glad you gave that to another woman, fictional character nonetheless. But you said, I love you too much not to give you this resolution and this confidence in the way your life's playing out. So yeah, thank you for that. And I took great pleasure in that ending for that reason.
And I will say, just to add to that, there is a very definitely personal piece of the ending, which is around how she learns to navigate her way and being herself in a British world, which has also been my life for the last almost 20 years. And I think there was a lot of finding that at the beginning.
Yeah.
Being in a place that I loved, in a city that I loved in London, and a world that I found fascinating, and never quite feeling like I belonged. And I still don't quite feel like I belong. I think, I am who I am. And I have found the confidence, as you say, it's a great word, and ability as a person to be who I am sort of unapologetically in this world. But that took a really long time, because this culture is very different from the culture I grew up in. This working world is very different from the working world where I started my career. And so that feeling and that sense of figuring out who you are and being okay with who you are as a stranger in a strange land was very important to give to Lucia. And so I hope you found that in the end.
Oh,
too.
yeah. And in answer to your question earlier about kind of what I took from the book, I kind of stumbled on what it was why I was so addicted. The escapism was there for sure. And the ability to witness a woman's journey of becoming and finding herself and growing in confidence and authenticity in this world. This was the thing that was the thing that I kept returning to. I wanted to see her win.
I think that's a great point to wrap up the Q&A part of this episode. I think now we're going to spend some time talking about our takeaways. And so, Alisha, I wanted to ask you, what do you hope to achieve by publishing this book? It's out in the world. It's out of your hands now. In a way, you have no control over it. So what do you hope to achieve in that?
it's really terrifying to know that other people are going to read this without me being able to like explain every piece of it to them and be like, oh, but I did this because of this. Fundamentally, I hope people are entertained and enjoy themselves. I think the real world, very much so in the sector we work in and in the real world more broadly right now, feels very heavy, very dark, very, very challenging on a day-to-day basis. And if I can give the people who read this book the opportunity to escape for a little bit, to be entertained for a bit, and maybe to like secretly learn a little something about philanthropy, think about some of the choices they make, think about some of the things that we accept as normal or status quo that maybe we should question. I've lightly poked fun at some of those. That would be a win for me. That is what I hope to achieve. I would love people to have that moment of their day or their weekend or their commute or whatever it might be where they're like, oh, I'm going to take a step out of this real world for a little bit and I'm going to enter into this sort of real world, but where there aren't the same kind of concerns that I'm thinking about on a day-to-day. And that's certainly what I'm personally craving for a lot of the entertainment I'm consuming at the moment. And so I would love to be able to give that to other people. And I would love them to, again, secretly, it's an enjoyable book, but I really hope it does make people think, both people within the sector to think about some of the weird paradoxes that we don't always talk about in this world that we operate in, and some people outside of the sector to learn a little something about this very important work that we do.
What a way to explain this world that people don't really know about and is operating all the time.
So you need to bring it with you on your dates and hand it to someone who asks you what you do. And just be like, actually, go off and read this book and then come back and talk to me. You'll understand.
I'm a married woman now. Honestly, I think I might have to give it to my husband because I still don't think he knows.
I think after working in almost 20 years in this field, it took my mother reading this book to actually figure out what I do for a living. She was like, oh, it's that. Okay, I get it.
Okay, Josiane, I have a similar question for you. In your opinion, as, a philanthropy professional, a general book lover, what do you think someone's got to give reveals about the philanthropy sector? And what does it achieve intentionally or otherwise?
Well, what I think the book achieves, and really based on this conversation, there is something about the power of fiction in having a different kind of conversation about the world that we work in. And I know that people who work in social innovation spaces, that's definitely, and call it social impact consultancy, that's a conversation that we have, is the power of imagination and creativity and metaphor and story to kind of reach new ideas or new tensions in a way that kind of softens it or kind of expands us into having these conversations differently. So I think that's really powerful and really well done. And I think we need more visionary fiction or fiction that can kind of bridge these worlds a bit better. Intentionally, it's hard to say what's not intentional about the book based on this conversation. Everything I thought was not intentional, it turns out was very intentional. So I don't know, but intentionally, there is this question: at what cost? The long shadow of the question of at what cost is, and is it worth it? And Lucia has her resolution there. I don't know if some of the other characters have their resolution, and I think there are some characters we owe a resolution to. I'm thinking of the nonprofit leaders and kind of people who are vulnerable in society, and who maybe aren't platformed so much in this book, because that's not what the book's focusing on. But is it worth it? And I want that world to be spoken to too. So yeah, at what cost and is it worth it is definitely the kind of intentional question of this book that I think is so important to mirror back to people who work in this sector. Maybe not intentionally, but something that's so wonderfully surprising is how we're all writing our own story anyway. Like this is a fictional world that sometimes we're in fictional stories ourselves, or we're in stories and we think this can't be real, right? This is not really happening. So the way that this book blurs what is real life and what is kind of a crazy, wild world that you think could only be written in a book, and it blurs that so beautifully, which is an unintentional, I think, kind of reflection of how some of the spaces and conversations that we navigate, and I think it's cathartic for that reason.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely chapters in this book where I was thinking of someone who doesn't work in the sector who's going to read this and think,
there's no way.
That doesn't happen.
Exactly.
That's not real. But it is.
Actually is. I will tell you that one of the most fun kind of set pieces to right was when she's at the conference on the private island. There are some specific elements of that, the amount of money charged by a big pop star, for example, to come and perform at a charity benefit, the custom cocktails and the swag bags, which I had comments from my editor, which were like, this doesn't seem realistic. And I was like, this is actually the part where this is nonfiction, okay? I've been to events like this. I have seen how much these people charge. I have gotten the unbelievably nice swag. This is a real part of this world. And those bits were very fun to write and also fun to be able to push back on some folks who didn't think that that was real and be like, actually, that's the most realistic part of this book.
I'm side-eyeing our step-in producer Kit today because our director is literally at a conference at the pyramids right now.
Wow.
And he sent a picture of his site visit to our Teams chat of him at the pyramids.
Amazing.
Excellent work.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope he has the best time there. That is incredible. But yeah, you sometimes you just can't make it up, and yet you did, and yet you didn't, and that's the fascinating thing about this book. And I challenge any other author to try and achieve what you've achieved in this book. You know,
I agree. Okay, thank you so much to both of you. You have been incredible guests. I think we've had a really interesting conversation. So last things to say, Someone's Gotta Give is out on the 5th of August.
Yes!
And Josiane's review will be published in the September issue of Alliance magazine, which is coming out in very early September.
It's good I have her contact details now, so if she pans it, I know where to find her.
And the book is available to buy basically everywhere.
Yes, you can hop into your local Waterstones if you're listening to this in the UK, any bookstore across the US. If they don't have it, ask them and make sure they carry it. You can buy it online. I would love you to do that from an independent bookstore if possible. And on audiobook as well. I haven't even heard the audiobook yet. Sadly, they did not let me read my own audiobook.
That's a shame.
Oh, that's
this
a
time.
shame.
I was just thinking it would be fantastic.
Were too many accents that I was just not going to be capable of doing. I think my British accent, even after almost 20 years in this country, is appallingly bad. I mean,
my God, can you give us just a little
no,
Yeah, we have to.
I can't.
We have to.
I can't. I can only do Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins, like the most fake Cockney accent you could ever imagine.
Let's hear it.
They're like, hello. How are you? I can't.
Yeah, I mean, that was fantastic if you're trying
It was a great Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins. Thank you so much. So yes, there is an audiobook though as well, read by a phenomenal Latina voice actress. And so you could also listen to it if that is your preferred way to get your book content. You can also come listen to me talk about it in real life all over the world. I'm going to be on the East Coast of the US in September, the West Coast in October. I'll be at a number of different events across the UK, in Edinburgh and London, and anywhere in between that anybody wants to invite me to. So you can come talk to me about this in real life too if you want. All of that is on my website.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Alisha. Thank you, Josiane. This has been incredible. This is Alliance Magazine and also IG Advisors, and it's been an amazing conversation today. Please do check out some of Alliance's events. They run all the time. They are on our website and we talk about some really cool, interesting things. Sometimes they're not always about fiction books, unfortunately.
Yes.
But the best ones are.
They are phenomenal events. And I think, I said this to you offline, but I'll say it for the record, which is I think you guys are doing some of the most interesting, thought-provoking stuff in the sector. So thank you for including me in that.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you both.